Here, in the heart of our ocean's ecosystem, every detail matters. The dolphin's communication, the shark's hunting patterns, the health of the coral reefs, each element hinges on the others. As scientists and educators, we face a similar challenge of seeing and understanding all the details in our classrooms. How do we ensure that every student grasps the fundamental concepts before we introduce more complex topics? Just as I need to assess the reef's condition at critical points to understand the bigger picture, teachers need quick, reliable ways to gauge student understanding during a lesson. That's where the idea of Hinge questions comes in. Are your students ready to swim deeper, or do we need to reinforce the basics? Let's dive in and explore how these questions can transform your science classroom. Welcome to class. This video introduces the concept of Hinge questions as a formative assessment technique for the classroom. Hinge questions are used at key decision points in a lesson to determine a student's understanding enough to move forward. We will cover the basics of Hinge questions, how to plan for them, how to use them effectively in your math classroom. What are Hinge questions? Let's look at some key vocabulary terms that will be central to this unit. A Hinge question is a question that checks for understanding or proficiency at a specific point in a lesson. The lesson's success depends on the responses. The Hinge point is a specific moment in the lesson where you need to assess student understanding before proceeding. Hinge questions are themselves one of the 5 types of formative assessment, and a formative assessment is an ongoing assessment used to monitor student learning and adjust teaching. Hinge questions provide in-the-moment signals to guide instruction. Finally, we come to the term diagnostic. Hinge questions are diagnostic because the responses immediately assess or diagnose what students know about a topic. So why would we as STEM educators use Hinge questions? First, they provide in-the-moment feedback. Hinge questions provide immediate insights into student understanding. Second, Hinge questions inform instructions. They prompt student responses that can guide your next instructional steps in lesson planning. Third, they engage students. Thoughtfully designed Hinge questions provoke mathematical reasoning and engagement on the part of students. Fourth, they can promote classroom discourse. Hinge questions can facilitate discussion by encouraging students to clarify and justify their answers. Next, we'll look at considerations for planning for Hinge questions. We'll learn about when to use Hinge questions. We might consider when they might be appropriate at the end of a lesson, or key Hinge points within a lesson. We will reflect on the question type. We can consider using multiple choice or open-ended questions depending on the grade level and the content and the time available to ask the Hinge question. Next, we can anticipate student responses. It'll be important for you to think through the range of possible student responses and how you'll address them. Finally, we can consider different response methods. We can determine how students will respond. Will they use cards or dry erase boards or devices? We note that depending on the focus of the lesson, Hinge point questions might be used to determine particular points of progress within elements of a lesson. The pacing you choose for a lesson might hinge on specific Hinge questions you plan to ask at key transition points in the lesson. In this module, we will learn implementation strategies for Hinge questions. We will consider when, how to pose the questions, and how to clearly present the Hinge question to the class. We will talk about the importance of wait time and allowing students a few seconds to process the question. We will discuss methods for collecting responses. You might want to use pre-prepared cards, individual whiteboards, or digital tools to gather answers. We reflect on how to analyze the responses to Hinge questions quickly. How can you identify common errors and levels of understanding? Finally, we'll learn about how to adjust instruction based on the responses to the Hinge questions. You will learn how to use the data to guide immediate adjustments to the lesson or plan for the next day. Overall, from this module, it's important that you remember the following concepts. Hinge questions are diagnostic tools that inform your teaching. Planning is essential for effective Hinge questions. Student responses should drive your instructional decisions. Consider using Hinge point questions at particular content breaks in a lesson, or using the Hinge question toward the end of the lesson. Remember that observations, interviews, and show-me techniques will influence and help in preparing how to use Hinge questions. By using Hinge questions, teachers can ensure that their students have a solid foundation before moving on to more complex topics. Thinking back to marine biology analogy, Hinge questions help us better understand the complex web of learning that exists in every math classroom. Enjoy diving into this powerful method of formative assessment.